Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar, our MPG webinar this afternoon. It's really nice to have you all joining us. I think we still see a few people joining. I see the numbers going up, so it's lovely to have you all joining us this afternoon. This is the Pivot to Virtual Strategy discussion with Toby Daniels from Social Media Week. We decided to put this webinar on a couple of weeks ago when we were putting the strategy together with Toby for the marketing of this event. And we felt that the Social Media Week team based in New York, but running events all over the world, is a very innovative, brave group of people who, if anyone can create a fantastic virtual experience for their community, certainly Social Media Week can. So we're very privileged to be here today with Toby. Thank you very much, Toby, for joining us from Social Media Week. And we also have Alicia Drew, who is the marketing manager for Social Media Week and a senior marketing strategist with MPG, and myself, Helen Kutzea, CEO and founder of MPG and agency, a group of marketers who help B2B media and events businesses serve their communities well with good marketing. So we are very happy to be here today. These are difficult times, obviously terrible times for a lot of people. For most of the world, we're struggling with various challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity, obviously, for innovation. Innovation is kind of being forced on us at the moment, whether we like it or not. And we are very keen to hear what Toby has to say about their process of innovating at pace, at scale, and how that felt for Toby and his team. And so we're really, really pleased to have here Toby. Just to introduce you very, very quickly, I'll introduce Toby, who is the founder and CEO of Social Media Week, and Social Media Week 1, the large virtual event coming up soon, is essentially Toby's brainchild, and the creation of his team. And he is very well known as a media marketing and technology guru who's been featured in CNN, the New York Times, Huffington Post, Adweek, Fast Company. There's a long list and events that he's spoken at. So thank you very much, Toby, for being with us today, for giving us some of your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Toby will have to dash off at 5 minutes to 5. He can't stay for the full hour because he is hosting Social Media Week 1, or SMW1, SMW1 show, and that's a weekly show that Toby's putting on online every Wednesday, 5 p.m. UK time. I think, what's the time in New York, Toby?
Noon.
Noon in New York every week, leading up to the event, to talk about what's going to be happening, to discuss some of the key features and some of the things that will be happening for all the attendees and the sponsors, etc. So for the next 50 minutes or so, we'll be discussing with Toby what his strategy has been in pivoting to virtual, how his team has managed to do that, and what's going to happen next, basically, what we expect will happen next for the delegates and for the sponsors. We'll be running 3 polls today in this webinar. So the first one of which has already been published. So if you can all just look at your little polls tab in the top right-hand corner of your screen, there's a poll there to find out how many of us have already got virtual events. So Alicia, do you want to just talk us through that poll very quickly, the first poll that we're going to be running?
Yeah. So in the polls tab, you can see the first poll we published. So are you planning a pivot to virtual for an event that has previously been a large-scale conference? So please submit your answers and then we'll get back to them in a bit.
Yeah, you can choose more than one option. So when you do fill in that poll, you will see the answers once you've submitted your input. So once you've ticked the boxes yourself, then you'll see the answers. It's a live poll. It will change over time. And then after this session next week, we're going to be collating, or later this week, we'll be collating everything that we cover in this session and in tomorrow's marketing focus session, to do with everything that we cover, all the discussion points and the poll, questions and answers, and the analysis we get from that, and we'll be sharing that on our blog next week. So thanks very much. We've got over 80 people now who've joined us, which is brilliant. Thanks everyone for coming. And let's get started. I think we've covered off the main kind of administrative points and the introductions. So great. So Toby, let's go to you now. And could you tell us, please, about tell us about Social Media Week as a brand and how it started and its journey, and Social Media Week 1. What are your plans and why?
Well, let me take the audience back to the depths of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, which is when we sort of first conceived of and then subsequently launched Social Media Week. And the reason why I want to sort of start there is because there's just like an interesting parallel between kind of what was happening in the world at that time and obviously what's happening right now. Not to suggest that the Great Recession is necessarily the same as the global pandemic we're experiencing, but I think at least in terms of our industry, there are some sort of interesting parallels. So one of the big inspirations for starting Social Media Week for me was the election of Barack Obama. And at the time, social media was being used in some really interesting and really creative ways, particularly in terms of how people were using the tools and technologies to self-organize around the things that they cared about most. And in this regard, it was obviously the election of Barack Obama. And then subsequent to the election, very early in 2009, during his inauguration, I was watching the inauguration live on CNN.com, and they were simultaneously integrating the Twitter feed into the live broadcast. And this is one of the first times that they had done that. And I sort of just felt like I was witnessing kind of like a moment in history, a sort of a really important time in regards to kind of the advancement and application of technology and social media, particularly in the context of like a live broadcast event. And that really just served as kind of inspiration and gave me the sort of the confidence that we needed to begin convening more people, and we need to be having more conversations, elevated conversations that look specifically at the kind of the role and impact of social media on business and marketing, of course, but the role and impact of social media on society and how it was, potentially going to sort of, change culture. So we launched a conference. We designed a sort of a model that was sort of distributed with events happening all over New York City. We then subsequently expanded to multiple cities around the world with like different conferences happening in 6 or so different cities simultaneously, all connected through one sort of set of conversations via a platform. And then really over the course of sort of 10, 11, and 12, we went from sort of one city, one conference in New York City to about 21 cities internationally. So we grew very quickly, scaled very quickly, reached a very large audience of professionals who wanted to come together to talk about kind of social media. And then really sort of since then, to sort of bring the kind of the story up to date, we've hosted in 30 plus countries. We have brought together hundreds of thousands of professionals. We connect to millions of people online through our conferences and through our digital media properties. And when we sort of think about kind of, where we are in 2020, we started the year much like everybody else thinking, okay, this is going to be our greatest year. We were busy working on all our flagship conferences in New York, LA, and in London. And then obviously, the latter part of Q1, we obviously, COVID-19 was becoming kind of a very serious global pandemic. And obviously, the entire world at that point, seemed to pretty much shift on its axes. So here we are today.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that rundown. So in terms of the Social Media Week 1, SMW1 concept, when you were faced back in March and, in the very early days of understanding how severe this COVID-19 impact was going to be on the world, and you made a decision at that time to go virtual, to go fully virtual, at a time when a lot of people were postponing their events from Q1 and Q2 into the second half of the year, and some were having to cancel them because it was too late to postpone. So how did you make that decision? What was your decision-making process to take that path?
Well, first of all, I think in January was really when we sort of first, got wind of the fact that this virus was becoming hugely problematic in China, and obviously, latterly the impact on Italy. And I'm never going to claim that we knew what was going to happen, but we started to take it very seriously at that point. And I think, for most of us, when Mobile World Congress canceled, which to a lot of people felt very early on, but also felt like the right decision. The entire event industry, anyone really sort of thinking about organizing any type of sort of mass gathering over the course of the next few months, really started, I think, to think in terms of what's my contingency? What are the different scenarios that I need to be thinking about that's going to enable me to mitigate the potential risk, protect my business, and ensure that I can kind of like get through this if there are going to be some sort of major disruptions to our business. And again, I'm not going to take any credit for having any particular kind of sort of foresight. I'm very privileged to be part of a community of media and event entrepreneurs, hundreds of CEOs and founders of event businesses and media businesses around the world, a part of a community that Pierce Byrne and the Collingwood crew, helped to sort of like organize and facilitate. And, being part of that and being able to connect to other people thinking about the same things in real time as this whole sort of pandemic was starting to kind of sort of like evolve and grow. And obviously as the disease started to spread internationally, we were as a community able to come together and really sort of talk about, okay, well, what should we do? How should we respond? What if my event's happening in April, May, June, July? Should I be thinking about postponement, pushing it to the kind of the latter part of the year? Should I even consider sort of going virtual if we're not allowed to be able to gather people sort of, physically? And so being tapped into that community was a huge kind of like source of like insight and information. Also Ashley Friedland, who runs Guild, that's another kind of phenomenal resource to be able to kind of tap into. And that's been sort of very helpful as well. So that's one sort of aspect of things. And it's important, to recognize these communities, and it's important to kind of be invested in them and be a contributing part of these communities, particularly obviously during times of crisis. And then, to talk in more specific terms about like our own sort of decision to pivot, our thinking at the time was, our New York event was in May, beginning of May. Our LA event was in the sort of latter part of June. At first, we just thought that like the New York event would be the one that we would have to kind of either cancel or postpone. But we sort of quickly realized that this thing was going to kind of run probably through most of the summer. And so, at first we're thinking, okay, postponement, second half of the year, everybody who can postpone will postpone to Q3, Q4. That's going to be a very busy time. I don't know whether we really want to compete with these other conferences. I think we will be better served to pivot to a virtual model. And I'll give you a little bit of kind of like extra context here. So, first of all, we're Social Media Week. We have our events are very large scale. Our New York event is like 3,000 people. Our LA event is 2,000 people. Our audience is very digitally savvy, right? So, and we've always offered a digital component, a virtual element to our experience. We live stream our conferences. We make it available via our SMW Insider platform. We have a big kind of social integration and mobile app component to the experience as well. So the leap for us, at least, didn't feel like a huge one to necessarily take in terms of moving essentially 2 very large scale conferences online. So we had some confidence in the decision, but really, let me walk you through the kind of the very sort of the inner workings or the inner thinking behind kind of making this sort of decision. We came together as a team. I developed a kind of like a high level strategy in terms of how I think we should pivot, and it was based on a ton of input from a whole bunch of people, including our advisors. And I presented that to the team, and then our head of design, Sam Dabkowski, sort of took that, thought about it for a few days, and came back and sort of presented like an alternative version of that strategy, starting with SMW1, the name, which he sort of put in front of us and said, what do you guys think? And my reaction to that was like, it's perfect, because it's the embodiment, I think, of like what's happening today as we all come together and connect in these kind of like new and profoundly interesting ways. So SMW1 really sort of like, is very much an embodiment of kind of like what's happening. And then, his other idea, which he pitched to us, was like, rather than trying to cram everything into like a 3 or 4 day virtual conference, how about we think about this more like as a series, or think about it like episodically as like a TV show, because ultimately people will engage with our content and this experience very, very differently compared to attending an in-person event. So we need to cater to kind of user behavior. We need to cater to the ways in which people are going to be accessing this content. So we decided to kind of take essentially our New York and LA programs and then execute them as a virtual conference series over a 4-week period. So it was then a case of like, okay, let's make the pivot, let's launch the brand, let's tell everybody that this is happening, and then work as quickly as we possibly can to build the website, figure out what the technology solution is going to be, figure out how to execute hundreds of hours of live streamed content over the course of 4 weeks. Let's talk to all of our sponsors, let's talk to our speakers, let's talk to our attendees. And that's really all we've been doing over the course of the last month. Really it's been a process of rapid iteration and consultation and collaboration with hundreds and potentially even thousands of people who are really sort of coming together to help us and like make this a reality and help us execute on this conference.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's a real team effort, is what I'm hearing from you, Toby. In terms of you had the original, I guess, vision and what was possible, knowing your event, knowing your community, knowing how you'd develop the brand in the first place and the experience in the first place, and then your team and your advisors helped you work out what's the best way to execute this. And we can see from our first poll, if you haven't already started participating in our polls, please can you, or the first poll we've put up, if you could please vote in our poll or input your information in there. So we can see that 44% of the people on this webinar participating as attendees and visitors to us, 44% are planning to run a fully virtual event that was a conference between April and September. So that's actually quite a lot of people, I think, who are doing quite a hard pivot to virtual. And we can see that 12% are planning one between October and December. So that's quite, that's more than half of the audience that we've got here who've decided to go on the same journey as you have. And it's a pretty hard pivot. Let's face it, there's a lot that people need to consider in terms of their skills, etc. I'm going to publish the second poll now in terms of the questions. And those questions are around having the skills. Sorry, I'm just trying to publish this poll right now. There we go. I've published the poll. So really understanding in terms of the team that you have, Toby, in terms of your core team in New York and other people you work with, what did you feel were the most valuable kind of skills and elements that people have to bring to the party when you want to make an event like this successful for your community?
Well, I want to go back just 1 second, because I want to make sure that the audience understands that I really wouldn't want to claim any credit for having some kind of sort of vision necessarily. It really has been this extraordinary and iterative process of looking at and trying to tackle a problem and bringing as many people into that process as possible. If I've done anything along with my business partner Brian Leddy is just like drive a process. To the question specifically, and again, this wasn't an insight that I had necessarily, but it has really informed almost everything that we have done over the course of the last few weeks, which is that the first place to start for us and the way to think about what we need as a company in terms of expertise and skills is to think about value creation and ultimately how do we best serve our most valuable stakeholders during this time. And it's an important point to make because like Social Media Week New York and Social Media Week LA were conferences that were conceived pre-COVID. So the programs themselves to a certain extent became quickly obsolete at the point at which we made this pivot. So it wasn't a case of just like dumping a whole bunch of programming into a new thing. We had to kind of look at every single session and think through and ask the question, to what extent is this relevant given the moment that we're in right now? So SMW1 is essentially an opportunity for us to bring the world of media marketing and technology together to think about what's happened, think about and talk about what's happening right now. How do we respond to this moment, and what is the pathway through to the future? And then how do we serve our industry through SMW1, which will be the vehicle that brings people together, which will be the platform on which we host content and conversations that will be thinking about these various different questions. So the value creation question is an important one, because it means you start not with what's the technology, or how do we do live streaming, or what webinar tool should we be thinking of using for this particular kind of event, but you just simply start with, how do we create the maximum amount of value for our stakeholders at this moment in time, with the strategic purpose of it also returning some of that value to you as a business. We are not an altruistic endeavor. We are a for-profit business, and we, like everybody else, is thinking through how do we adjust to this moment and continue to exist as a sustainable for-profit organization. So when we think about the team, ultimately, when you start with value creation, and you don't start necessarily with what's the technology solution, what's important in regards to my team is that they are adaptable, that they are able to make the necessary adjustments in real time. And we've always operated a cross-functional, very flat hierarchical business, with people who are fulfilling at least 2, and in some cases 3 different roles within the business. So a cross-functional team is one that will adjust to these moments much more quickly than a hierarchical one where everyone just sort of like exists in their own lane. And that's just been hugely important to us and very evident in us making this kind of particular shift. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think adaptability and people who have multiple yet valuable skills that they can apply in a team setting. I think that's been really evident from where I've been sitting, watching how you guys have reorganized your content, created basically a whole new program, used every member of your team and some partners to help you with that, which has been interesting to watch. The other thing I think worth mentioning is we were hoping to have Brian here today as well, your COO, Brian, who kind of runs a lot of the operational side of things for you. Unfortunately, at the very last minute, he got pulled away onto something else because he's wearing more than one hat, as you just said. So he couldn't join us here, unfortunately. But I think it would be good to also understand in terms of, just to go back to that technology piece now. So you worked out how to create your value, the proposition that you had to put together, and what was important to your audience, to your community. What did you find was the most pressing kind of concerns of your sponsors at this time, and how did you involve them? Like, how did you bring them on board with the journey towards your virtual experience?
Well, I do want to say one thing about Brian. So Brian is like, I've sort of described him as my right arm and my left arm, and he occupies most of my brain, and is just a massive part of this company and our ability to kind of make this sort of pivot. We literally could not do it without him, and unfortunately, he has so many responsibilities that I get to do the fun stuff, and then he gets to, he gets to keep the train on the tracks. I'm very grateful for it, though. But yeah, to answer the question, I mean, it's been simultaneously a brutal experience and an incredibly important and insightful one, to get on a phone call with 40 different, sponsors who we have already, have signed agreements with, and we've already gone through the process of pitching and selling and closing and getting signed agreements. to get back on a call with every single one of them and say, okay, we're pivoting. We want you to come with us. This is the new value proposition. What do you say? You know, and it's hard because you're not just asking them to go with you in a normal set of circumstances where the economy is great and like, you know, we can really demonstrate like our ability to create value in this like moment in time. No, the whole global economy is like, you know, falling apart while we're simultaneously getting on these calls with these sponsors and saying, hey, we can generate leads and we can create brand awareness and, you know, do all of these different things. So very early on, we knew what the challenge looked like, and we knew that we would need to change the focus of the conversation, right? So right now, most of the partners and sponsors we work with are either like agencies, MarTech companies, or platform companies, advertising-driven businesses, basically, right? So we're talking about hosting a virtual conference series at what could very well be the peak of this pandemic, where everyone's still working from home and working remotely and adjusting to this new reality. And at a time where most of these companies, the mandate coming from like their C-suite is, we really shouldn't be out there overtly trying to sell. We should be trying as much as we possibly can to think about how do we create value at this moment in time to serve and support our customers. So we had to make a big adjustment in terms of what we're putting in front of people. We created, you know, virtual conference, virtual sponsorship packages. We avoided trying to do like an apples to apples, like this is what you got off in person, this is what you're going to get virtually. And we just created what we felt was the right value proposition for a sponsorship package, but that focused on digital execution. That was a fascinating and super useful exercise. So it was brutal to have to go on a call with some people and have that conversation, and for some of them to say no, obviously. It was insightful because we were able to sit down with all of our customers and most important partners and ask them the question, what's happening to your business right now, and how can we help? How can we be supportive to you during this time? And framing the conversation up front that way, I think has helped us enormously. And I think it's the reason why so many of our sponsors have ultimately come with us and will hopefully continue to work with us in the future.
Brilliant. So I think that sponsorship question is top of everyone's minds, and really knowing them well, getting close to them, understanding what their needs are right now, understanding how you can create value for them right now and how they are having to create value for their customers right now is absolutely key. So keeping that at front and center. I think one of the questions we keep being asked is, can you charge for delegate tickets when you are running a virtual event? Because you want to keep your sponsors happy, right? You want people to engage, you want people to register. And that's one of the key ways of maintaining some of that kind of sponsor value that they bought into in the first place. And this is where we've, as MPG, as your marketing partners, we've had been really most focused, I guess, in working out how the messaging has to play out for both people who've already bought a delegate ticket and those who will buy new delegate tickets of for your new proposition. Where's the core value, the real value? How is that going to be so valuable to people that not only will they go on a 4-week journey with you, but they will also hand over some dollars for that experience, and balancing that against the need to have a large audience. So there's a bit of a risky game you're playing there, I guess, that some people might think, well, a lot of the companies, the other companies we're working with, have chosen not to charge a delegate fee. So it'd be good to understand, the logic behind that, and also we know that you're doing a lot for your community in terms of giving passes away as well, and how you came up with that kind of structure around which people would come for free and which would have to pay.
Right. Well, first of all, I think we've learned a hugely important lesson from the sort of publishing industry over the course of the last decade. If you imagine, if you go back to the kind of the advent of the internet, and it's like newspapers and publishers started to think about what they should be doing digitally, their move at the time was, we go online, we take essentially our print product that people pay for, we put it online, we give it away for free, and then we'll sell advertising against it. And we've obviously discovered that that wasn't particularly great business model, and certainly a very difficult one to sustain. The businesses that have done really, really well during that period, and in particular have done exceptionally well in the last couple of years, are companies like the New York Times that 4 or 5 years ago launched their sort of digital subscription product and started to put a lot of their premium content behind a paywall. And I actually had an opportunity to interview the CEO of the New York Times during Social Media Week a couple of years ago, and we were talking about their pivot to digital. And he has this one line which I've always remembered, and I think it's just so elegant. I think it's incredibly important for us to all be thinking about today, which is the New York Times, and this is the way in which they all got the entire organization to come together around a business model. I'm talking about journalists as well as people on the kind of commercial sales side of the business to come together around one single idea, which is that the New York Times' focus is to create content that people are willing to pay for. And it's so elegant because of the fact that it drives you to think about creating the most compelling content, and in our context, the most compelling experience that is priced in a particular way that people feel is justified and that people ultimately are willing to pay for. So we didn't hesitate when we made the pivot to virtual to launch ticket sales and charge people for access to this product, because we knew that the quality of the experience, the quality of the content is something that people would be willing to pay for. Now, despite that, of course, we also have to be hugely sensitive to what's happening right now, right? We are, most businesses in some capacity and individuals almost across the board are experiencing some type of financial distress. So we obviously have to be sensitive to that. People might not be able to afford to pay to access SMW1. They may have been recently laid off. They might be a small business and may even be unable to function as a small business right now. So what we decided to do was launch ticketing, priced at about $499 for access to 4 weeks of live programming and 6 months of on-demand content. But for every single ticket that we sell to presumably someone that can afford it, we will also gift 1 ticket to someone who is unable to afford it. So whether you are a nonprofit, a small business, a sort of an individual sole trader, or if you've recently been laid off, you can apply basically through our grants program, and we'll give away thousands of these passes to people who can't afford to join. And then the third thing that's worth mentioning is that we priced it, and I get this question a lot, and I'm always happy to be fully transparent about it. We priced it at about 1/3 of what the in-person event would be. And that's largely because the cost of executing an event like this virtually is probably about 1/3 of the cost of executing something in person. And so that kind of just made sense in terms of how to think about what the individual price point can be. And obviously our advantage in going virtual, and anybody's advantage in going virtual, I should say, is that we are no longer constrained by the physical parameters of an in-person event, which means we can scale this and probably 3 to 4x the size of the audience, which is very exciting. I would say one of the most, and there haven't been that many positive things to be drawn from the current situation, but one of them is a feeling of being somewhat liberated from the constraints of putting on in-person events. And that's definitely kind of opened up our minds and allowed us to kind of think more creatively about how we execute on the experience.
Great. So that's also been something I think that I've been working with my team on here as we've been looking at your marketing, is that opportunity for scale, that opportunity to go global. And what does that mean when we are structuring the marketing strategy and the marketing program to get as many people globally as possible involved? So that, that's been enlightening as well, when you kind of suddenly take the restrictions away and think, oh, this is global. It's kind of I heard someone recently use the term hyperscale So when you're thinking about scaling an event, you tend to think, oh, if we can get 10, 20% growth in attendance, that'd be amazing. But actually, this is hyperscale. This is going, very, very, very large compared to what you had before. So whatever people might say about sponsors losing out on intimacy of the face-to-face experience, they can gain and scale. And it's about being able to understand that trade-off, I guess. What I'd be really intrigued to know as well at this stage, Toby, is before we go to questions. So a couple of things before we go to my final question for Toby now is, could you all just submit your questions, please, in the little questions tab on your screen. We're going to go to audience questions very shortly. And if you could please also participate in all 3 polls. I've published the last poll now, which is about, are you planning to charge for tickets? And how will you be doing that? So if you could all please participate in these polls, that would be really helpful. And participate and you can see what everyone else has said. That'd be good. These are live polls. Keep going. So my final question to Toby is, what's been the response you've had from your community? So, you must have your super fans in your audience. There's people who always attend Social Media Week, who love your brand, who love your events. What are those kind of personal stories of people coming back to you and letting you know how they feel about what it is that SMW1 is going to mean for them?
Well, let's start with the detractors, because I think that it's important to talk about those that have chosen not to come with us or are unenthusiastic about our pivot. Because, there are plenty of them. I mean, we're a large scale event. We have thousands of people providing us with kind of feedback all of the time. We obviously, like everyone else, we survey all of our attendees, and the people that generally kind of like complete a survey and provide us with feedback are the ones that have something kind of negative to say. And that's great. And we love it. We're always very much welcoming of it. But yeah, some people were not happy. I mean, we literally had people say to us after we had said, look, we're going to give you free access to this platform because you are already an existing delegate of one of our previous conferences. They were like, well, this is not what I signed up for. And, I don't believe this is going to be as good, or I don't believe it's going to be as valuable, or, I don't have time to participate in something like this. Or, or actually a lot of people came to us and said, look, the economy is tanking and my business is not doing very well. Like, I can't afford to either take the time or even afford to purchase a pass. So we get a lot of that, right? So we deal with that and we respond as constructively as we possibly can. In terms of the people that do come with us, I mean, we're very lucky on a few different levels. But I also think that this is something we kind of, designed into Social Media Week in the very early days. It's always been, community has always been at the heart of what we do. When we started it, my idea was not to create a top-down type of model where sort of we dictate the content and what we talk about and the format and the flow and all those sorts of things. And instead we create like a more bottom-up, more grassroots sort of enabled experience. And that certainly was the case in the early years, and the reason why we were able to scale so quickly. And many of those people have kind of stuck with us over the years and are, a continued part of our community. So having that core part of your community is hugely important, because we provide as much value as we can, we lean on them as much as we can, but during times of crisis, that's when you really want to pull that community together and involve them and engage them in every single step. One of the reasons why the company I actually run is called Crowd-Centric Media, and one of the reasons it's called crowd-centric is this idea of concentric circles, right? So you sort of think about your audiences in concentric circles, right? Working outwards from the sort of the center of the first circle. And you think about your community in terms of where they fit into these different concentric circles. And at the absolute kind of core, at the middle, are a group of people who are independent from us, that have been on advisory boards and have been supportive to us over the years, that we have always maintained some level of engagement with. And so when we made this pivot, the first thing I did was I hosted a Zoom call. I invited like 30 of them to come together to join me in a conversation. We laid out the vision, and then we said, here are the ways that you can help and support. This is what we need from you at this time. And that was just phenomenally helpful to have that group of people that we could engage at the absolute core, the most engaged, the most committed people that we've worked with for almost a decade now, to pull them in and to consult with them and to ask for their support was hugely helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Toby. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the questions from the audience. So just so everyone knows, whatever questions we can't answer now in this session, we'll definitely be covering in a piece of content that we'll publish next week. So if your question isn't answered now, we'll come back to it later with a considered answer. For now, if you could just upvote the questions that you think, submit your questions, but also upvote the questions that you think are most relevant to you. So Alicia, I'm going to move to you now. If you could just maybe select, the most popular questions, the most upvoted questions, and let's see if we can answer some of those with Toby.
Yeah, so first question for Toby, which we haven't really covered yet, is around the platform. So how did you come to choose Bizzabo? What are the pros and cons? Why did you discard the ones you discarded? Yeah.
Great question. First of all, I will go back to Ashley and the Guild and peers and the entrepreneur meetup communities, because again, everybody was trying to figure the answer to this question out at the same time. So that has been a useful resource. I would say that we probably moved very quickly and through a process of evaluation. I pulled my team together and said, these are all of the kind of the use cases that we need to be thinking about in terms of designing this experience across from, starting with like, how do we execute an individual session, a talk, a panel, an interview? What does the networking experience look like and how do we unpack that, et cetera, et cetera. So every single kind of thing that we needed to kind of execute on as part of the experience we laid out first. And then we just went through all of the available technologies that are out there and just did an assessment of which offered the best features, and the features in particular that we felt were relevant to what we wanted to do, but also gave us kind of some flexibility. And at the time, we were actually we pretty much built most of our own technology over the years, but we were actually making a pivot from our existing platform to Bizzabo prior to COVID. We were moving our whole event platform, everything from registration, ticketing, agenda schedules, the whole thing. We were just moving over to the Bizzabo platform because we just loved the platform and we had a huge amount of confidence in this being able to provide us what we needed from an event management standpoint. And they quickly recognized that there was an opportunity for them to build out a virtual conference product as an extension to the existing event management products. And they worked with Kaltura, which is an enterprise level video streaming product, and some other kind of technologies to sort of make this pivot. And we just felt that the number one most important thing is for us to have a robust event platform. So when people buy a ticket and onboard, that customer journey is seamless from the point they buy the ticket through to the point at which they attend an event. So the agenda was very important because we power everything through the agenda, right? So figuring out what you want to attend, what you want to participate in, etc., how to schedule your own time, how to create your own personalized kind of like event experience. That was already baked into the existing Bizzabo products. We felt that was going to be just as important as the other elements, right? So live streaming a session or broadcasting something as a pre-recorded piece of content. Also, we needed that to be very strong and robust. And Kaltura is a 10-plus-year-old enterprise streaming company. So we have a lot of kind of confidence in that being the right tool for us. And then the last piece is obviously all of the interactive elements. I mean, everything that we're currently experiencing right now through this product, chat, Q&A, polls, those things are important. And those are all kind of very much part of the product that we eventually went with. And then, there's just a ton of other things that we're thinking about in terms of networking. And this question might come up, so I'm not actually going to answer it now. But if it doesn't come up, we'll come back to this point later. But obviously thinking about how you facilitate and a valuable networking experience for people that is ultimately virtual is top of mind for us, because content is one piece, but networking and making meaningful connections is an equally important piece. And to a certain extent, content serves as context that drives conversation, and conversation is a really important factor in how people make meaningful connections. So we have to think about that whole experience. So I can talk much more about this stuff, and if people want to reach out to me, feel free, if you're interested in getting a little bit more insight into kind of how we evaluate technology. But there's some great tools out there, I will say that.
I think that networking question is one of the highest voted questions, Toby. So the question, how are you replicating, redefining the networking elements of the live event? It's got 27 votes, so I think it's a pretty pressing issue.
So, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, and you know, I haven't just been thinking about it right now. This is something that I've been thinking about for close to 2 decades, and in the last decade, in the context of you know, networking. How do we use technology to facilitate networking, but during in-person events, right? So we've tried every tool, every technology imaginable to facilitate networking, and we've had some successes and certainly some failures over the years. But I think what we have a good understanding of is ultimately what people want and what people need from these experiences. So I'm going to say a couple of fairly controversial things. Right now and for the foreseeable future, we have to let go of this idea that like in-person, intimate networking experiences are far superior to anything that you can possibly recreate online. And I want us to let go of it, not because I want to suggest that like in-person isn't valuable, but I want us to be investing our time and energy into thinking about what the digital alternatives offer us that the in-person experiences cannot compete with, right? Because that's where innovation, I think, really happens, is when you're sort of backs against the wall and the problem is really difficult. Then we start to come up with really interesting and innovative ideas in terms of how we can create value for people who ultimately are motivated, like all of us are, by the idea that to do my job, to grow my business, to be able to advance myself in my career, I need to build a valuable network of like-minded professionals, right? So that's where we're starting from when we're sort of thinking about it. The other thing to think about is that networking doesn't have to happen in a silo, right? It doesn't have to be like one single experience. When you think about an in-person event, right, you can connect to people through facilitated networking experiences through speed dating, although I've never really loved that particular format. You can network with people at the cocktail event. You can network with people immediately after a session. Or alternatively, you can get on the mobile app and you can meet and network with people there, right? These are all things that are very well sort of understood and known to us. And when you think about a virtual event, you have to start with, well, where are all of the places where people are coming together? And then how do we design networking opportunities for people at all of these various different places? So whether you're attending a session and you're in the chat, or you're asking a question, or whether you've been kicked into like a breakout afterwards, or whether you're joining a hangout, or whether you're just simply kind of, you know, utilizing, because we're going to be launching like a dedicated Slack community. So whether it's Slack or WhatsApp, or whether it's on LinkedIn, off platform in somewhere else, whether it's just on social media, like think about networking in the context of how hashtags work, right? That's where networking happens. So you have to think about every single different touch point and different place where people are coming together. And then you have to think about what is your role as a facilitator of networking and as a creator of meaningful connections in these various different kind of experiences.
Yep. Okay. And then another question is looking to the future. So whether you've thought about 2021 and whether you'll go back to the live events, or social media one will continue, or whether you'll consider some kind of hybrid format where they run alongside each other?
You know, the most difficult question, without a doubt, and one that I don't necessarily have, I certainly don't have a definitive answer for, because like no one has really. All I know, based on everything that I'm reading and based on all the advice that I'm receiving and all the reports that I'm reading, is that in-person events probably for 50 or people or more are very unlikely to happen this year. And that's just something we have to all accept and recognize, as depressing as that might sound and as devastating as that might be to our respective businesses. I think there's a considerable amount of validity to that statement. And if it's not the case, great, but we have to think about a future that is factoring in an inability to be able to bring people together in groups of more than 50 people. As things start to kind of like open up, and as events, large scale events, start to become more of a possibility with all the various different kind of measures and things they're going to put in place to hopefully safeguard people at these events. What I want to think about is not the idea of going back to something, but I want to think about the future in terms of how we are moving towards something that will continue to create value and serve our industry and stakeholders in the best way we possibly can. So for us, SMW1 and the virtual conference experience, we feel is something that will be around for the foreseeable future and will be a really important way for us to be able to serve our stakeholders, particularly globally and simultaneously. And we also think that there will be a hybrid version of what we deliver, with probably smaller events, at least initially, but events that create value for people at the local level, that really build on these like in-person, the benefits of like in-person experiences in the best way that we possibly can. I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about the opportunity that this creates for us. You know, don't get me wrong, I have grieved for my old business. But I'm excited about the prospect of thinking about creating, you know, new and alternative experiences in the future.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Toby. I'm very conscious you have to dash in 4 minutes. So I wanted to, and we've got a lot of questions, audience. Thank you for your questions. We will be reviewing them and coming up with some kind of answers, hopefully, to send to you. So for now, Toby, is there anything else you think you'd like to kind of part with? Just say thank you so much already for everything that you've shared. We really, really appreciate that. I think the community you've just spoken to appreciates that. Is there anything else, like a parting thought, that you think would be good for us to leave with?
Any words of wisdom or advice?
Sorry, say that again.
Any words of wisdom or advice?
You know, not especially, and that's for other people to kind of judge whether it's wise or helpful in any particular way. But all I will say is this: you know, I feel a deep sense of obligation and responsibility at this moment in time in regards to how I can be supportive to anybody that is going through this, and any company that is thinking about how they pivot, you know, to a virtual type of conference experience. So I mean it when I say, please do reach out. You know, I'm happy to share our own experiences as much as I possibly can, and I'll take the opportunity just to plug the SMW1 show, in part because obviously we'd love for your audience to come and join us and experience the SMW1 show, but also it's happening in like 8 minutes, so that's the reason why I actually have to jump off a little bit earlier. But yeah, so and this actually maybe even serves as advice as well, because we launched the SMW1 show, which is a weekly show. It's a 90-minute web show that happens at 12 o'clock Eastern every single week. And we launched it in part as a precursor to our virtual conference, but also, and this is the important thing, it's also designed to kind of like exercise this new muscle that we're having to now use, which is like hosting these types of events and thinking about designing the experience and thinking about how we can best serve our stakeholders. So go to smw1.com/show to register. We go live in 6 minutes. So with that, Helen, Lisa, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys and hopefully you know, share some useful information and insights with your audience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Toby. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.